All right. Aaron Smith is here on Not Done Yet podcast with me, Terry Wolf. And thank you for coming onto my show this time. I've been on yours. And, the obvious reason to have you on is that you published a book. Congratulations. It's very nice
Mm.
to have a fellow self published author, you know, among us that tried encouraging people everyone I know basically to write books and self-publish because once you figure it out and it's a big headache and it's stressful or whatever, but once it's finished, you realize that it can be done, and
Yeah,
it's created a huge sense of accomplishment for me. And I've written and published like 5 books or so,
yeah,
and I it was so rewarding. So welcome to the club of and yeah, like first of all, just introduce yourself, what you, uh, because most of my listeners will not be familiar with you. Introduce
sure.
yourself and then talk about the reason why you wanted to write the book.
Okay. Yeah. So Aaron Smith, Terry and I met when I was doing the Subtle Cane podcast. And I started the Subtle Cane podcast kind of in the midst of the COVID pandemic, scamdemic situation as a almost a cathartic outlet to start with. Um, I was in nursing school as a non-traditional student at the time, and so I was seeing a lot of different things that really troubled me: the cognitive dissonance, the flipping the script on things that I had been taught just a semester or two previously. Um, so that kind of got me um, interested in looking deeper. I'd always been a curious person, always been someone who would question narratives, but that really, a lot of people, it was, in this, I don't know, space community. I don't like any of the words that people use, but people that are looking deeper and critical thinkers. A lot of them, it was 9/11.
Mhm.
For me, uh, I was too involved in other aspects of my life that I didn't really ever pay attention. But by the time COVID came around, after some disillusionment that I'd experienced uh, near the end of my military career, I really kind of started digging deeper. And as a Christ follower, I had a lot of spiritual discernment that I felt, a lot of conviction about things that I was seeing, and it was really troubling to me. And so I started the podcast, which brought me to meet so many very uh, intelligent, interesting people that we had some great conversations. Um, I live in Wisconsin, and yeah, I guess between being in healthcare, my military background, and then my faith, those kind of things converged in a way that brought me down a certain path. And um, I think we initially met, Terry, about an interview because I had read your book, Fire in the Rabbit Hole.
I seem to
I, I
remember that. Yeah.
I believe that was the initial contact that we had, and trying to figure out, like, because you get to this point when you start questioning a lot of things, trying to figure out, okay, what is worthy of my time and energy, because there's so many distractions that you can get pulled into, and then there's
Hmm.
so many different directions, and I wanted to take a step back. And so that book really spoke to me, and that um needing to apply discernment and critical thinking, even when things, we like to think of ourselves as the ones who are critical thinkers who can't be taken into an op. But there's Jacques Ellul even talks about people who are able to see those things can also be very susceptible to
Hmm.
propaganda. And so, um, just trying to always keep a measured and a faith-based perspective, a biblical perspective about what I'm seeing in the world. So that brought me to all kinds of different topics, including transhumanism, the beast system, all the different elements of technocracy and what that looks like, and the mechanisms that are being put into place in society. And so, kind of like we were talking offhand, the catastrophizing,
Hmm.
um, there's a benefit to minimizing and catastrophizing things to kind of try and find a middle ground, or to at least understand what the potential ramifications of things you're seeing are.
Oh, that's
And
interesting. Yeah, because you one of the things I'd like to do, and I've only kind of recently become conscious that I do it, is to blow up an argument to the uttermost limit that you could take it, just to see what's out there. What like you know, I have never seriously taken the reptilian shapeshifter elites thing seriously, but that's an example of like now you're into the absurd and like the this like you know beyond mystical level of like reality is an illusion kind of gnostic worldview almost or whatever. But it's like, okay, you can go to those extremes as a thought experiment to say, what if everything is like, and then this is what Fire in the Rabbit Hole was kind of exploring, is that you have this explosion now of that conversation. Nothing is off the table, flat earth, uh, the idea that there's just multiple timelines that we're switching between, so multiple realities can be true at once, and these kinds of things. Like, these are serious belief systems now that people cling to as part of their identity and stuff. And then, but then that's interesting to say that like there's a value in going out there and then also to do a thought experiment in the opposite, that it's like minimize it down to like there's just what would you say is a good example of that? Because I feel like I know what you're talking about,
mhm,
um, but like I see commentators like whenever an ex CIA or like somebody who's like in the professional world of analysis, journalists and stuff do it, they stick to the hard facts so tightly, and they just see everything as motivated by very petty things. There's never really a greater ideology, and even the
mhm,
big like even if they acknowledge that there are these um, philosophers in history and these like papers that get published in these think tanks and stuff, that they always sort of just say, yeah, that's sort of just like it's like once you're actually in the club and you're part of this circle of people, nobody takes that seriously. So
mhm,
yes, there are these like Malthusian depopulation control grid, theories out there and stuff, but like within that world itself, everybody sort of laughs at that, like that's just stupid. And I just want to get mine. I just want to be rich and have women and whatever they want. And you see something like the Epstein files, and it's like that's a crazy limited release. Obviously, they still haven't released nearly all of the actual stuff. But even from just the stuff you see there, it kind of does feel like, as much as you could imagine the nebulous shadow world of conspiracy and high level intelligent discussion and coordinating stuff, they all seem stupid. Like
yeah,
every conversation seems very stupid and petty and just like libido driven and selfish. Like it feels like there couldn't possibly be a mastermind in the mix there. So how do you see that difference? And
mm.
like like I don't know how much you consume. It's also healthy to just have a limited diet of how much you're trying to consume of these discussions. But um,
I do have a limited diet. It doesn't mean I don't try to keep up, at least topically. I wouldn't say as far as the news. I, I'm not as on top of what's sort of trending. However, I do try to stay somewhat up to date so that I can have a relatively intelligent conversation about current events. with people as they apply generally to the kind of topics I talk about. But in the idea of the catastrophizing and minimizing and finding that balance, it does a couple things, and I think it one of the basic and most beneficial things is it does allow, I think, someone to have a little bit more measure of compassion and to approach these topics because um, one of the things that I've noticed more and more, and I've discussed this recently, um, is the you know how powerful language is, right? As an author, as someone who does a lot of writing, a lot of very articulate articles, well thought out, you understand how powerful language is. And someone who studies propaganda, it really it helps us paint the story of the world and the nuance, the amount. That's why I always say it doesn't matter. I don't think people need to have a large vocabulary for the sake of whether they think they're smart or think they're. But if you can, to the extent that you're capable of, expand your vocabulary. What you're doing is you're expanding the nuance of your ability to think. And so, one of the things that really is disturbing to me that I'm seeing is the English language. Not only has it been squashed and turned into memes and LOLs, but just the very matter of our lives, the schedule of our lives, the way we're moving through this world is so algorithm driven, which is by nature ones and zeros. And so
Mhm.
it's literally a binary way of seeing the world. And I think this plays a heavy toll on our some subconscious. And so as we're going through this world and we're given um, ones and zeros, good, bad, good, bad, good, bad. Now there is ultimate good and there is evil. I mean, as a Christ follower, I truly profess that. But there's a lot of gray within the human experience that we have. And when we so easily and so readily are placed in these oppositional binary positions, I think that is really enforced and reinforced by the ones and zeros. And so the more nuance we can have, the more compassion we can show the people that we disagree with, the more ability we have, I think, to have a constructive discussion with them. And so that's kind of one of the main benefits, I think, of the catastrophizing and minimizing is you provide yourself a greater spectrum of nuance within which to work.
Mm.
Um,
You can relate to people at all these different stages of understanding, and um, there's people who are very like 10 times more passionate and involved and dedicated than I am. No, like but that's thousands of times more dedicated because I really don't do anything. I just enjoy, writing and talking about stuff. But they're like literally like in the city councils and they're doing the protests, they're organizing, they're investing their actual lives into this stuff. They're getting other people involved, but it's all local. So it's
mhm,
like they're super passionate, but they could not care less about international intrigue
mhm,
and, bankers across the world and, historical influences and these meta trends that are all like so if you want to relate to that person and your only way of talking about it is with high level satanic, like I talk about prophecy, that's about as high
yeah,
level as you can get. Like the idea that
yeah,
all world events like sort of despite any human awareness are conforming to a blueprint that God created thousands of years ago, and that's cryptic and needs to be decoded. Like that is so unrelatable to and somebody who is doing all this good hard work at like a local level. And yeah, it's I think I understand what you mean there, that, like, you have to be able to like, expanding your language, uh, your lexicon is like, I envy people who are multilingual and they can even get into the multiple languages that you can always tell that there's a maturity that comes along with that, that the ability to, like, because certain concepts don't even exist in some languages,
Right.
and so it's sort of once you have every words are like tools, right? Like, the more tools you have, the more you can do, and so if you just have a couple of words, and even if you're trying to accomplish something, it's like, "Well, I have this word, I'll use that for this," and you're really not capturing the real meaning, and so, I mean, this is obviously, like, George Orwell, 1984, like, reducing the language and dumbing people down. Um, I've noticed, just as an anecdote on that topic, that, on TikTok, which, could easily be seen as the ultimate weapon of dumbing people down and addictive doom scrolling and just, never, making a real contribution and distracting people and stuff. They have introduced, the ability to, like, react or post comments with just images, so you don't have to write any text, you can just do an image, and it has been completely taken over the comment section on TikTok, which has just changed in the last, like, 6 months or so, and it's very funny, like, people are very funny on TikTok. It's in a way, it's a very healthy, um, platform, and it can also be very destructive, and this is one of the things that, I was gonna ask you about b related to your book and just your worldview of where we're going. Because you talked about the ones and zeros, and a lot of people recognize the damage that's being done by algorithms, but I've always I completely agree, but I also feel like somehow, maybe it's just my habits or something, but, like, I love my TikTok algorithm. It's not, like, it's inspiring. I see great conversations on there. I see Christians. I see real journalists who are doing hard-hitting, serious investigations. I see old clips of documentaries that I forgot about. I see, like, it's so I guess it tailors itself to you, right?
Mhm.
And my algorithm is legitimately, like, it's way better than YouTube. It's way better than, like, it's like a university course that's just, like, never ending. I'm learning so much stuff. And then when you read the comments, you get, people asking real questions. I see a lot of genuine curiosity around, um, important issues. I can see that there's this huge, like, I don't wanna use the term awakening because it's so co-opted and, um, everybody uses it for even when they're the ones that are deceiving the most, but there is at least this huge curiosity, and I see it as potentially very positive, and if I didn't know better, if I didn't know how other people were discussing, I would say this is the best thing that people could use. Like, I remember the '90s, and I remember people sitting and watching TV and, like, sitting through the commercials and, like, you'd listen to the radio, and there was nothing edifying. There was some good TV, can't deny that there were some good shows, but, like, how do you reconcile that, like, something like Substack too, it's essentially a feed, it's another algorithm, um,
Mhm.
but I get so much value out of it. I don't miss the pre-internet, pre-social media world at all. I feel like it is supercharged all the things I am interested in. I don't think I would be nearly as effective or engaged as I would be otherwise if it wasn't for that. So I'm seeing all these positives while also understanding that there is censorship, there is an attempt to restrain it and to control it and to weaponize it. So I'll just sort of throw that in your lap, but, like,
Sure.
do you think that that there is a net negative, a net positive, that it just sort of polarizes people into the direction they were already going. It just pushes them further down there like an echo chamber, or what?
I think there's a couple different aspects. So when I'm talking about the algorithm, in the sense that algorithms run our lives, and the binary nature of the language behind it, um, that I think that ones and zeros there, I think in that sense, built into the system of our lives. I'm not just talking about social media
Mm,
or things like that. I'm talking about, I go to work, I log into the computer, the tasks that I'm given, the life that I have to do day to day, the way my appointments are scheduled, the things that happen in my day to day life. There is a subtext of ones and zeros running me, and
mm,
that's more to do with um, the the postman idea of technopoly, the idea that technology is now using us as a tool, or Alul's idea of the technique. Um, so that binary language aspect, that does also play into what you're talking about with the different algorithms. And so I think one of the things that is a major reason why TikTok is so successful, whereas some of the other social media platforms, yes, they're successful, they have a lot of engagement. There's two different driving things happening. So on your other major platforms, your X, your Facebook, um, th- those have to do with playing the human psychology that they're working with, the behavioral psychology that are built into those algorithms, have to do more with playing toward our negative bias. And so the attention, the eyes on the screen, are drawn in by conflict.
mhm.
And so, yes, they'll give you more of what you like, but they're also going to push conflict. TikTok's success has much to do with the fact that their algorithmic persuasion is to focus on confirmation bias. And so the affirmation is what brings attention of eyes. Now, that being said, you can be a critical thinker who utilizes the tool of technology, and you can use the either algorithm. I can see where TikTok, I haven't experienced TikTok myself, but I can see where that algorithm and the way that that's programmed for someone who wants to use it as a tool is going to be extremely helpful, because you can sift and winnow through stuff that's going to, and so you can start to really narrow in your algorithm to show you things, and like I said, sift and winnow, and kind of get rid of some of that um, more nonsensical or distracting stuff, that as you're training your algorithm to kind of get rid of the fluff
It
and
becomes a
start honing
reflection
it.
of you, and if I feel like that's what I have done, and
Yeah,
I wouldn't say I'm proud of it, or I think of it as like some sort of, like, if I didn't have TikTok, I would essentially be in the same place, and I've already written books, and before TikTok, I had all these same views essentially, but,
yeah,
um, like, it is, you're building a mirror, of yourself. You're not you're not really being exposed to completely different ways of thinking, or, the way that you would if you read a book. Like, there you're investing in one person's narrative of how things work, and they have their own model is of the world, and you're not necessarily adopting the model, but you're holding it and you're expecting it, and you're deciding how much of it to integrate. um, if you just get a bunch of bite-sized things that confirm what you believe, I can see how that's, um, I feel like there's, oh, actually, I don't just feel like it. I know for a fact, because I had my TikTok account where I was dealing with so many people who had never done any research, and this is where Fire in the Rabbit Hole came from. It was the idea that you know, that it was suddenly becoming sexy and like popular to be a conspiracy theorist, and that, it was fashionable, but it wasn't deep. It was just reactive. Anything that came across their feed, they would be like, "Oh, that's what Freemasons run everything." And then now the next time, "Oh, it's actually some other group." And now it's just like they're just getting tossed back and forth by the winds of
Yeah.
whatever the algorithm happens to show them. And there was no discipline before that, so they don't um they're not questioning it now. And so that's one of the things I try to warn people about when I'm discussing that, is like the discipline and the discernment and all that stuff. Like if you have that before you get exposed to this scattershot, whirlwind of information, um, then you can start, like you said, sifting through it. Um, but I do feel sorry for people who, with good intentions, jump in with both feet and think that they're doing research and think that they're learning, but they're actually just getting completely contradictory narratives, back and forth and back and forth. And they just, I think this is why they just come away with the general impression of we're all screwed and there's nothing we can do. And, there's evil people, but like they don't have there's nothing coherent about their worldview out of all of it, which is unfortunate. And often I think they latch onto a certain person or commentator that, I think this is where somebody like Candace Owens or somebody like might get this huge surge suddenly in popularity, because it's like, well, I've been scrolling and I've heard 50,000 different versions of how what happened in Venezuela. Like, what was that about with Maduro?
Hmm.
Like, you could
Yeah.
ask that. That we could all have 1,000 different. Was it an inside job that Maduro wanted to blah blah blah, or was it this long time ancient plan that was happening, or is it just some dumb thing that Trump came up with on the spot, or was it a secret conspiracy? Blah, blah. Like, there's so many different narratives around one event.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I'll just play it safe and I'll just listen to whatever this one person says. And so I think that's kind of the net effect of what's happening. And
It
then,
it's very unmooring.
yes. And what I would, what I'm curious about from your point of view is, how much do you think that our current day is like, this is somebody's script of how to unmoor people and how to destabilize um, culture and, break it from its traditions, or like, where do you think this is all being guided, or do you think it is this technocracy run amok? It is big money and big tech run amok? Do you think it is sort of an out of control thing, or do you think it's much more in control and the chaos is sort of a byproduct or a desired feature of what they want to do?
Yeah. Part of me just wants to say yes. Uh, um, but that would be unproductive. I think so. Going back to the fact that that and we share a biblical worldview, and the fact that there's a spiritual war going on, and there are entities that outdate us, who are hyper intelligent, who have um, all kinds of goals of their own. Who knows? Maybe some competing goals as well. And so, amidst the 10,000 foot view, you know, you have God's got his overall plan for humanity. But then there's also all of this time in between, as prophecies fulfilled, as things transpire. We're given free will to make decisions, and so there's so many different layers on the spiritual level that I think influence what we see by the time it filters down to us. But I will say that there are things like psychological operations that are actively being held, and one of the one of the key tools in psychological operations is something called ambiguity increasing. And you can find it. I wrote an article about it on my Substack, but you can find it in the DoD handbook as well. And so that is kind of a scattershot approach to confusing people and making them feel so unmoored from like where the threat is coming from that
Mm.
they actually become totally ineffective at any kind of defense. And it takes a minimal amount of actual like forces. So it's a force multiplier in the sense that all you have to do is just let that stuff run amok. So you can plant the seed, let it run amok. So I would definitely say that I think that there are um, probably some of the more major influencers or people behind them that are seeding some of these different narratives intentionally to have people who have a lot of credibility in the alt media or whatever to kind of lead people down these different rabbit trails and then cause that unmooring effect. And so when people don't know what's going on anymore, they just don't have the ability to come up with any kind of a plausible defense against the constant onslaught.
Yeah, that's the like, I wrote an article once. I don't think it was a very good article, but it was trying to get at the idea of um, the rabbit hole itself, because people that's just now common lex. Like everyone is says, I went down the rabbit hole. I'm like, okay, you realize that's like a reference to Alice in Wonderland, where you end up in a world of nonsense and inversion and everything is an illusion, and like it's
Hmm.
it's actually a reference to being completely disoriented and uh easily manipulated.
Yeah.
Like it's not something to be proud of that you went down the rabbit hole, but it's become meaning that I just did some research and I'm like, okay, what was this rabbit hole? Like, how far did you go? And it's like, I watched like a half hour YouTube video on it, and
Yeah.
that's it. It's like, oh, you did the absolute mindless minimum of watching some guy, which is half AI generated, like they don't even understand what deep research would look like. They just know that they stopped scrolling for a little bit, and now they actually went and looked up a thing and heard someone make a longer argument about it, or like, you know, listening to like a Joe Rogan podcast that's like 3 hours long on this expert that's talking about this thing, and you've got one particular perspective with one of the dumbest commentators of all time, hosting it, and this is your grand research that you've done. And so in that, I tend to think like one of my favorite authors and one of the most eye-opening books for me was The Underground History of American Education by John Taylor Gatto.
Mm.
um, Famous, I mean, at least in those circles, famous New York school teacher who started to expose the education system as being a deliberate, planned system for dumbing down children and conform them to the factory industrialization setting, and getting Americans to conform to hearing a bell and then standing up and moving on to the next room, because that's how factories work. Like, you hear the bell, you do this. Now you have a 15-minute lunch break. You come back, you do this, and everything you do is compartmentalized, and you're completely changing focus. You don't go back and keep learning about the thing even if you were interested in it. You have to now switch to this task, and it's like task-based, time-based management. Like, the
Yep.
structure of school itself is designed to, it doesn't matter what they teach. The important thing is that you're learning that habit. You're learning to fear a petty authority who's standing in the room, and there's 30 of you and one of them, but if they just give you a bad look or they tell you something, you get scared of them. And like, all of that was very deliberately psychological, and that really blew me away, because I was like, despised school when I was in it. And I couldn't tell why. I just felt like everything was unnatural and everything was weird, like it was a bizarro world. Um, and then it was when I read that I'm like, oh, this is what real social engineering looks like. Like
Mm.
there can be a conspiracy that is all the original architects of it are dead, and everybody who's currently running it has no idea it was even designed to do that. Like it is on autopilot, but it was so well
Yeah.
designed, or so at least, maybe it's not sophisticated, but it's well designed in the sense that like it doesn't need to be well designed. It's just with this structure and with this format, it will just continue to do its thing. And I think of that with psychological operations, marketing. You look at stuff like, um, is it who's Freud's nephew that did the marketing stuff? Was that Bernays, or what was his name?
It was Edward Bernays. Yeah.
Edward Bernays. Like you go back and read the things he was saying in his book Propaganda, and like a lot of those psyops are still working. Like the guy's dead, he's gone. Like it doesn't have to be an active, managed thing. It has a life of its own when one of these social engineering projects is effective enough. And that's kind of to me like a reasonable middle ground for discussing how why things work the way they do, because people find it hard to believe, or I should say they find it necessary to believe that there is a super coordinated, high level, constant, all levels of management are in on it, and and this is the classic dismissal of conspiracy theorists, is that somebody would say something, there's too much that would be involved, but they underestimate how much people just go along with a system once it is
Yeah.
established, and there are suddenly just budgets, and there are protocols, and there are standard operating procedure, and there is a manual, like you said, the psychological whatever manual. Like even within these organizations that could theoretically steer it a different direction, it's like I feel like everything's on autopilot, but at the same time, there were people originally who pushed it in that direction and said it's going to keep going on autopilot in this direction. And like that to me is a pretty good middle ground between total control versus chaos. It is more of a mindless directional um, force that is pushing us all or pulling us all in a certain direction. And the tech world, and every time a new technology appears, I guess that generation who is involved in it gets to sort of vote on what the new direction is going to be once we start incorporating this. And so it can kind of adjust itself.
Mhm.
And then you kind of have to look at it again. So, um,
I think so. I think you make some very good points there, and I agree. I think of something as simple as the knee jerk reaction to say "bless you" when someone sneezes, and very few people even knowing
mm,
why they do it.
true. Yeah.
Um, so that's a very very micro that you put on the macro. But I think it's also safe to say that most people in our lives, and especially more so as more and more things are automated and more things are done for us, are more apt to take the path of least resistance. And that just isn't everyday people at Walmart or at the coffee shop. That goes all the way to the highest echelons of power. The path of least resistance is what most people are going to follow. And
Mm,
so um, there's very few true revolutionary thinkers and pathfinders, but there are people that are positioned in the correct places right now, even, and historically, that made major contributions to the system being implemented.
mm,
And as now there is, you have kind of some of the tech bros, some of them maybe just playing along with the game, but there are some really revolutionary concepts that aren't necessarily new concepts, but there are people that have right now been positioned in a place where they can affect change that will then just be adopted as policy. And so, in order to maintain the bureaucracy, maintain the technocracy, you don't need a bunch of visionaries who are uh, passionate
Passion.
about the mission.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Exactly what I was going to say.
It's
You
just
could
got to
have,
punch the clock.
yeah, yeah. You
You
could have
know?
a routine conspiracy, and it's like people don't even that. Oh, that feels like a paradox of like a oxymoron to just have a lazy routine conspiracy to do like you would imagine like the something like the CIA, has to be constantly on its toes and second guessing everything and somebody is like it would feel like because you imagine that there's this active resistance as well and then how if they're not constantly like a cartoon character Saturday morning cartoon villain like plotting their next move and doing the next thing and they've got these big plans that somebody would would stop it and it would like there has to be this constant tension that is forcing them to be vigilant but I the more I learn the more I feel like it's pretty it's a culture and it's ingrained and once you become part of the organization it's whatever training you get and whatever your official objective is goes for corporations and everything too big tech and all that stuff that yeah you can have a couple of visionary people movers and shakers who coordinate and decide policy and push things in a certain direction but it's shocking how many people at different levels are just collecting a paycheck and going along with whatever it is, even if it's a literal atrocity, if it's violates, if it's criminal, it's whatever. It's not. It's almost like it's not their business. They're just there, and somebody. If I wasn't doing it, somebody else would do it, and there you
Above
go.
my pay grade,
Yeah.
right?
So exactly. So, um, I mean, technocracy is when I think of it, I think of H.G. Wells mostly, and this idea of the world brain that he wanted to have that before computers even existed he was talking about that there should be this central repository of information that um, would standardize knowledge across the whole world and of course he always had this really nice presentation with just one part missing that there will be a hidden hand that controls all of it like the British Empire the Cecil Rhodes type uh British intellectual class that he belonged to, and that he fought with in some ways because he thought they were lazy. Um, he envisioned this world that would come where humanity would be managed and scientists would rule. And he inspired, from what I understand, it's not an exaggeration to say that um, he inspired basically the entire World War II and Cold War generation of leaders um, with his sort of like he wrote the book called Open Conspiracy, which is a beautiful term for what happens where a conspiracy by definition is supposed to be a secret
Mm.
um, plot of people trying to do something criminal or evil. But he flipped it and said if it's an open conspiracy, if we openly have roundtable groups and the United Nations and these different, you know, think tanks publishing papers, and he set the model and the example himself for others to follow that he could say things in his books, publish them openly that seem innocuous and or even beneficial and visionary and helpful and wonderful. And yet, if you kind of understand how to read between the lines, you can see a blueprint for how to destroy sovereignty and local independence and absorb everything into this technocratic system. And so that's what comes to mind when I think of technocracy, is really the heavyweight sort of architect or mind behind it. I think of H.G. Wells, and
And there are some zealots in each generation that have picked up the torch
mhm,
and taken it a little further. And you know, I don't want to give the impression either that I believe that it is truly just um, this snowball project. I mean, there are in easily identifiable, self-identifiable to your point with the open conspiracy, people who have they're in positions with significant power, with significant resources, and with a very explicit agenda that is, personally, I believe, anti-human. They would believe that they're trying to move the species on to the next stage of evolution, but
right, yeah,
specifically anti-Christ and anti-human. But generally speaking, the machine that they're at the helm of, um, trying to work, it it's already running in the sense that the parts have been assembled over a long period of time. This thing's been built generationally. It's getting closer and closer to realization, though I don't think as close to realization as some people believe. Of course, I may be totally off the mark on that, and tomorrow I'm going to be stopped from leaving my little sector that I'm allowed to,
mm,
you know. But in any event, the machine is running, and really the fuel of that machine, though, is our consent. And so, I think it is important to talk about the history of it, the current people involved, and what they're doing. That's not really what I'm as good at. I've tried to do some of that like in my podcast. I've written about some of that in my Substack. Um, but I also, kind of getting back to and I hope I didn't take this off the rails. Um, but what I wanted to do with the book was take that catastrophization and say, um, these things are happening. Like everything is a technology that's either being implemented, is being proposed to be implemented, or is being actively researched and worked on. You know what I mean? So trying to get that into a picture. So it's kind of what happens. I think I made a note for myself. Questions I've been asking on the podcast. The book is trying to do something with that shows what it's like if it would no longer be theoretical, and
right.
letting people experience what institutional logic does to ordinary individuals once conscience is deemed no longer efficient and no longer valuable, a moral conscience. um I don't know if my brain sometimes does a squirrel, so I think my brain just squirreled on you.
Well, I mean, it makes sense to me that you have we're talking about technocracy, and you're bringing it to, the catastrophizing we were talking about. That I've probably started 4 different dystopian novels where I wanted to write about the, you know, a realistic path that things could go down. It's, uh, you know, the problem one of the problems I have is that you see the branching paths that things could take, and therefore to commit to one and say this is the one you should watch out for. This is the thing that's going to happen for sure. And then I'm writing a book
Yeah.
about exactly a prediction of what everything is going to happen. Like that always discouraged me halfway through the process, and I'm like, but this totally other thing could happen, and that would be also be interesting. And I'm excited to hear more about how you decided, like, where to land on certain things. I just got the copy of your book, like a day or two ago, and I haven't read it.
Right. I was going to get that to you earlier, so I
but
apologize.
like I'm sure that people and then the other question is how much do you want to inject like a Christian narrative into the story itself versus you yourself just being a Christian who writes about this without um without that, because that was a problem, that was a struggle I had when I was writing, trying to write or at least brainstorm and plot out the stories that I was interested in um regarding that.
Yeah.
Like just talk a little bit about the process. Like you don't have, I don't know if you're, concerned about spoiling things, but people who want to read it,
I
there's
think
going to be
yeah,
some
I
plot
think
twists probably. So
yeah, I think I can straddle that line without talking too much about the specifics of the plot. So, um yes, to the kind of dilemma that you found yourself in. I found myself in the same dilemma. And then I thought about it, prayed about it, thought about it some more, and I said, "You know what? I just want to tell a good story." You
mm,
know what I mean? I'm not going to focus so much on the the end product. I know these things and I've researched a lot of these things and I know that they will be incorporated in a meaningful way into a story that people will enjoy reading and may find beneficial and say, "Oh, that thing that was in that book, holy cow, that story I just saw on the news about that thing they're going to be doing sounds an awful lot like that." Well, that didn't work out real well for them, but I kind of told myself I'm not going to take myself so seriously. I'm not writing prophecy. I'm writing a story because I just like good stories and I want to tell a story that's fun. And the secondhand benefit would be that I would be able to incorporate these things that I've learned about in a way that hopefully helps people. Because we think about the world in stories, you
mhm,
know, and we
yeah,
use language to do that. So these two things were in my mind thinking about how important those things are. And Jesus taught in parables for a reason. It makes things stick. So I thought about it like that. I thought I'm going to tell a good story. I'm going to incorporate these things, and it's not going to be so much a clarion call to run to the fight against technocracy as much as a benefit of the good story would be to um, possibly inspire curiosity in people that maybe not, so people that are in the vein of things that read similar things to us, have a similar awareness. I think they'll really enjoy it because of the fact that it will kind of play on their heartstrings a little bit, like, oh yeah, see, exactly, like that, right?
mhm,
But then
mhm,
it could happen like that. But then there's also the wider reach of people that just they're not going to log into Substack and look for someone like me and read an article. They're not going to listen to my podcast. They're not going to excuse me, seek out that kind of information on their own. Um, but they will read a good story, and
right.
maybe that will soften them up to the a possibility that this thing, hey, that was creepy. I don't want that happening in my life, and that thing looks like that. I want to know more now. So inspiring curiosity.
Yeah, for sure. I think I'm thinking of well, first let's make it very clear what book we're even talking about. It's
I'm sorry.
Project Nimrod.
See, I'm not a very good publicist.
Yeah, me neither. Apparently, I'm a bad host. I should have said that very early. Project Nimrod. What is there? What's the subtitle?
So Project Nimrod, it's Viveka Chronicles Book One.
Okay,
Um,
so now
so
this sets it up obviously for a sequel then as well.
yes, I'm currently writing book two, and have plans for a book three, and then a prequel, which will be book four.
Nice.
So, and I have my little vision map up there on the whiteboard, and I have some groundwork on all 4 books, but the actual writing has started on book 2 now, so I'm very
So
excited about that.
presumably the second book will not be called Project Nimrod because you've got the Viveka Chronicles as the main series title, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right, interesting.
And
Yeah,
so Viveka Society is the governing technocratic
mm,
rule over this world that I've built here. So
I mean, word association, but I think of Vivek Ramaswamy when you say that, and, um, I'm thinking of he's a, you know,
well,
character that
Viveka is a ancient Sanskrit word which has in English sort of means differentiation in a spiritual enlightenment kind of sense.
oh, okay. That makes sense then.
And so that's their that's Viveka Society. Um, and so I use a lot of my personal life experience to inform some of the aspects of things, what I've learned um, in the military, what I've learned working in the prison system,
Oh, yeah.
things
Wow.
like that, to help inform me for realism as far as certain aspects of things, and then
Mm.
also research that I've done about technocracy itself, the mechanisms, what that would look like, going back to the technocracy manual. So um, I feel like I've incorporated enough to make it for someone who's a little bit more in the know or familiar with the topic, that they will feel comfortable that this is a potential direction. Like I said, not meant to be predictive in any sense, um, but coherent in the framework enough to maintain credibility. Um,
That's I have to say that's I was already intrigued, but, um, bringing up the military background and the experience in the prison system, to me, uh, that excites me more about it because I can say from my own attempts at writing that those experience the gaps in your understanding of how institutions work is just it kills the like when you have to just speculate on how institutions work, it sucks the energy out of, at least for me, writing, and so I feel like I have to do a bunch of research into, and then I know this is true of fiction, you always have to do a bunch of research even if it's
yeah,
not based on that actual institution or that group, you have to at least know enough to know how, like, a logging company works. If you're gonna set your story in a forest where there's logging happening, it's like, you don't just wanna make it up, and so
I,
the more insight you have, the more you can actually write a realistic story that feels plausible.
yeah. It's funny you say that because just last night I had to stop in the middle of writing out a scene um, in book 2 and research what kind of trees would actually be growing near a fast running waterfall.
That's yeah, it's a perfect example, like, you could tell I'm saying from experience as well. I tried writing something in a forest, and I'm like, "Turns out forests are very real things that are very complicated, and you can't just." I mean, you can just make it up, but, and I'm sure a lot of stories do, but at least I become very self-conscious about, that kinda thing, and, um, no, I'm open to hear, more of a teaser for what this is, in terms of the actual plot. I know um, when I hear Project Nimrod, my mind obviously goes to Tower of Babel and the idea of uniting mankind, with one language, and that nothing will be impossible for man, which is what God said, that um, He divided mankind at the Tower of Babel because the unified mankind would be there would be no limits, and Do you want to just talk about that theme, the idea, or how much do you want to say about that?
No, I mean that is one of those, and I mean to people who are familiar with the Bible, that's not going to be a very good Easter egg. I mean, it's right there in front of you in your face.
Yeah.
But it's also it is I specifically picked that name with those themes in mind and thought now it's an acronym in the book that the scientists use because how often do these people do that? They'll like pick something totally scriptural or biblical and then they'll turn it into some crazy acronym, you know, to
Yeah,
serve their
apparently they like to pick from Lord of the Rings too. They're happy enough to just choose the Palantir from Lord of the Rings, and that's what they're literally naming companies after. So yeah, they love to evoke um,
yes, myth.
myth.
And myth just for my sake of insanity, myth doesn't mean false, but
Mm.
because people have a natural association for um, something being false. I apologize. A little
Bless you.
dust. Thank you. No, you got me before I took my next breath too. So, um, anyway, so Nimrod being the name was picked specifically for that reason and kind of with that in mind. The protagonist in this book starts out in his very menial jobs and in the entire Vivekan society, of course, the entire Vivekan society is split into two parties. And the two parties would be people who have accepted integrated technology, which is a transhumanist nanotechnology that they have accepted into their system. And so they are integrated with the sentient intelligence system that is given authority over all of Vivekan society. Then there are non integrated individuals, non integrated persons, or NIPS, as I call them in the book. And they are uh, either genetically incompatible with the integration technology or they have refused. In our protagonist's um, case, he has refused. And so his life is much more difficult because of that.
Hmm.
Um, However, he is invited to participate as an access to integrated life without being integrated. He's invited to participate in Project Nimrod. And so he goes there and has that experience. And in that time, has to battle the demons of his mind as well as the demons of the system in the sense that I start the book with a couple of quotes in the dedication, or after the dedication and the epigraph, and I think they might, if you don't mind, I'll read the three little quotes, and that I think that might be helpful.
Yeah, by all
Uh,
means.
the first quote is by Neil Postman from Technopoly. Technopoly is a state of culture. It is also a state of mind. It consists in the deification of technology, which means that the culture seeks its authorization in technology, finds its satisfactions in technology, and takes its orders from technology. The second quote is from Jeremiah 17, verse 9. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? And then the third quote is from Alexander Solzhenitsyn from the book The Gulag Archipelago. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And so this dichotomy of the battle within himself and his own um, fleshly weakness, his own um, struggle with the idea of taking the path of least resistance versus sticking to his principles. So that whole internal battle manifests itself in different narrative ways
Hmm.
throughout the story. But then there's also the kind of meta narrative of the system itself and how that system is interacts with people like himself who choose autonomy. Um, and so built within that, there's the physical world and the physical realities of what he experiences. And then um, another sub layer or maybe higher layer of that would be the spiritual battle that goes on. And I try very hard to coherently and rationally mesh those two in a way that makes the story, I think, fun and exciting and kind of keeps you on your toes about what's really happening. Um, so
Can
I
I
think,
ask, because you know, it sounds like a good setup, and I'm one of the things that I love if an author can pull it off. I think it's very hard to do, um, at least to do properly or to do well, but to show the appeal of the other side, to show the seductiveness of what they're fighting. Did you manage to explore that somewhat in there? The reason why people would go along with it, the appeal of Project Nimrod or this technocratic state and things like that, because
yeah,
um, uh, just as a anecdote in my own experience, I remember many years ago I had a video game fan site. That's how I started writing online, and it was fun. And I actually had a lot of international people reach out to me, people from China and Brazil and different places that were interested in my analysis, because I was finding all these social commentary themes and stuff. It's not entirely different from what I do now, even though it was based on a video game. Um, and so anyway, I got contacted by a literal communist in South America who uh, was a big fan of my writing, and he was writing a dystopian novel, and he wanted me to, like, give feedback and not be the editor, but give him some feedback. And I got a certain ways in, but then I stopped to give him some feedback, and I said he had this main character who in that society there was no guns and no weaponry, and everybody had been disarmed and whatever, and he finds a revolver or something like that, and it's like this private discovery he has that, and his description of the character's, like, reaction to it, it was like it was so bizarre to me, because the character finds I think a loaded gun that nobody knows about, and he's essentially the only person who would be armed in the country, and there's no part of him that finds that empowering. It was like a teenage guy, and it's like there's no part of him that says, "Wow, I could be this most powerful person if I just took this and used it." He's like horrified at the gun, and he doesn't want it, and he just thinks it's bad, and like the author was so concerned with saying violence is bad, and like that he didn't even stop to say that, like, but also it's hugely appealing and addictive to have abusive power. Like, it kind of like missed the point for me. It's like that the beauty of it is to show that that is a struggle to
yeah,
me. Like, that's one of the reasons I love dystopian novels, is that you kind of see how you might feel like a crazy person for having values. Like, that's kind of like a common theme across the whole genre.
yeah,
Do you enjoy writing that kind of stuff as well?
yeah. And I have to say, honestly, I can say honestly that that is almost one of the core battles that he um, is dealing with because I let him experience aspects of integrated technology and really um, show the contrast between what those two worlds look like and
Mhm.
why it would be extremely tempting and he has to battle inner has this inner battle with not only um, loyalty to people, but the desire for comfort and for relief and for just something good in life instead of always having to fight and fight and fight just to survive. That that door is open to him to totally surrender in a way that he wouldn't have previously, but he's so tired
Right.
and he wants it. So that temptation and that tension, I try to very much so um, work throughout the narrative and allow him to experience that in a very real way that I think will resonate with people as as someone who went through in my last semester of nursing school after putting all that time and effort in, um, didn't think I would be able to get a clinical placement or a job because I would not take the vaccine.
Right. Yeah.
Vaccine. And so sitting around at night praying, talking to my wife saying, "Hey, I don't know if I just did this all for nothing because this is a line in the sand I'm not going to cross." And so I might have really messed up here and it might really cost me a lot. Or deciding to go back to school and leave the military when I did, the way I did, which was all according to, the way you're supposed to do it properly. But I made a choice that no, I am choosing that I'm not going to participate anymore. I was given the opportunity to do that. But for the same reason, I had conscience issues. And sometimes I wonder if there's a problem with me because I have these
You know,
conscience issues that tend to cost me.
I, I, I see people with such lower stakes and not to guilt people who did take the vaccine, knowingly, unknowingly, for whatever reason. I personally, I have completely given up on judging people for
Yeah,
taking it because I see so many examples of people who are just like, yeah, I was playing Russian roulette and I said, maybe it'll be fine. And I knew they did it knowingly, and they still were just like, you're right, but still, I needed my job, and I couldn't. I need to
yep.
feed my family, and I need to live in this world and stuff. So there's just like, I'll get it over with. That's just one of the many sacrifices I've made to provide for my family and do what I have to do. And
Yeah.
it disarmed me. I'm like, okay, well, I can't just. Not everybody can just take a stand and
No?
refuse. And but that was, I think we all know people who um, decided to get it and sometimes completely oblivious and believed all of the propaganda, and sometimes people who were just as smart as you and me had the same information and they're like I need to travel to this country like next month and they're not even going to let me on the plane if I don't get it. So
Yeah.
I'm getting it. And
And that's the thing too is um that was my experience. I had a personal conviction. And so that's no that was between me and God. I felt that God was telling me, even if it didn't even have anything to do with the actual shot, at that point in my life, God was telling me, this is a line in the sand for you.
mhm.
And so he was testing my faith. I would never put that on anybody else wherever they are. That was a decision that they made. And I would never judge them. But for me, that was, and you've had things in your life too, apart from that, I'm sure, where you get to a certain point and all of a sudden you're like, I can go this way or I can go this way. And I know I'm supposed to go this way. And, you don't just apply that to everybody. You know that God's telling you this is your path, sir.
Yeah, and there's a utilitarian mindset of, whatever gets me to the next stage, whatever I need to do, I just do it. And then there's a principled, stance that you can take at so many junctures along the way where you're like, no, this is it. Like I couldn't live with myself if I because that's for me, that was actually the more important thing. To
Yeah.
to protect my health was less important than to say "F you" for trying to dictate this to me and control what I do,
Hmm.
and hang everything above my head. And so it's like, if I lose my job or I lose whatever I lose, um, like I, I I'm willing to see where this goes if I just take a stand on that and I refuse it. And again, my stakes are very low. I don't have some big, high paying job that I've you know dumped all this education into in a career, and like I'm pinning any hopes on it. So it's easier for me to say that. Um, so I find that we all had a taste of dystopia. In other words, like we all had a taste of exactly that. And actually, I think one of the strange paradoxes of like our current culture is that we have, I at least see, almost a total amnesia about that.
Oh yeah.
Like people have wiped that experience from their minds. We've all collectively kind of forgotten about what it was actually like during COVID. Um, you can everybody you bring it up, people can remember stories or whatever, but it's not like we're all living with the acknowledgement of what happened. So it's sort of like this traumatic, like I don't know if that's how PTSD works or whatever, but it was like I find it difficult to even get people to remember that that was a choice we had to make.
Yeah. I also just the sheer tenacity of some of the stuff we were asked to do. Like stand, I remember standing outside of Walmart in six, having 6 feet between you with a mask outdoors in wintertime, and only allowing people to go in and telling them to follow the arrows. And it's like, what are
Being
you saying?
literally herded by markers on the floor, like it's so it is the complete inversion of the free market, consumer first, all the principles you thought were invincible in
The
society
cognitive,
that
yeah,
yeah.
the cognitive dissonance, though, that discomfort that I see if I bring anything up that is uncomfortable about that time, everybody will tacitly acknowledge that it was bad, and but they don't want to get into any of the specifics.
Mm,
Um, and because, for one, I think there is a collective sense of guilt for folding the way we did
mm,
as a culture. Some of us took, drew lines in the sand in certain places, but not others. Everybody kind of tried to figure out where they belong. But as a
right.
society, as a country, Canada, United States, we folded and we flopped, and it was like, hey, you can get away with this now, which I think emboldened a lot of the rapid onset kind of stuff we're seeing now on the implementation of these things. A project, um, what was Stargate,
Yeah.
right out the gate, things like that. These tech bros and the kind of stuff that Patrick Wood and Courtney Turner are talking about, and just recently wrote in their book. Um, very, very emboldened if you are one of those visionary, influential
And
doers.
I think you would have to, I think it's foolish to assume that that they did not take the results of that test, and they aren't formulating the next thing, like another crisis that is at that level or much larger, that the fact that we did fold collectively has to inform the next big plan, because that was planned pretty well in advance. And
Yeah.
so why would they not go for it again? And this time, you know, this is where guys like you and me and everybody who's doing thought experiments and trying to think about what could be the next thing. Like I find value in going down those roads because you could see how people divided, where people divided. Obviously, I'm sure you saw the same thing. Households, families, pretty much ripped apart by these questions of, you know, are you literally like, I lost a friend, one of my only friends that I still had from high school,
Yeah.
because I was now a grandma killer. I was now the cause of the problem. I was just latently, without any scientific basis, the idea of being a non-symptomatic carrier that can, just like on and on, these talking points that are just uncritically accepted, and then but
Yeah.
guilt and shame and, all these things being pushed and ripping relationships apart that you'd think were, it's not that they're that deep, but you would just think that people would sort of would laugh at these types of, like, it is an absurd thing to break up a friendship over there's some medical question of something that is unproven and is just whatever, and the statistics don't even bear it out, and you think it would be, people
The
would
be
prioritize their own selfish interests and their own relationships and the things they know and their things they're confident in, and yet somehow that did actually flip over, and the narrative took over all common sense, and even the selfish, you'd think the more powerful selfish motives would take over. um but somehow that narrative and the guilt and the pressure flipped people's households and relationships upside down, and so
Well,
it.
the psychological warfare that did happen and the propaganda that was used, I mean, the behavioral psychology is extremely um, advanced in how to do that. And that's where we go back to um, sort of earlier in the conversation, that binary code. So when you can scare people, when you incite that fear response, when it becomes fight or flight, you really can um, erase people's ability to think critically or to stop and pause and analyze. And so they're making darting decisions. And that's
Mm,
when that binary code, that
mm,
that ones and zeros, you're either one of these or you're one of these. And that's where that really, that subtext, that plot that's underneath in our culture, I think really takes hold and assists in dividing people in unconscious ways that they wouldn't have predicted. Um, but fear is the onset,
yeah, true, and
certainly.
that's a common theme of my thought experience when I'm doing it, where the the irrational um the crisis that creates an irrational uh response, and how quickly it is almost instantaneous, that it is cult forming. It is, people join, like, there's a group think response and safety in numbers, and I'll just be part of this, and if you're not with us, you're against us. There's a crisis happening, and now, it's like, it's that simple. It's like just overnight,
Mhm.
like something huge and scary is happening. I need to be with the crowd. Like, it's almost literally just that simple, and then whatever the crowd is saying, it doesn't even matter. It's just, you're with us or against us, and I think there is basically, I've kind of had to come to terms with it as well, that I think there's, as much as we have these rational analytical discussions and stuff, that there is pretty much a veneer of rationality across all of society, and that, like, lurking right under the surface is this just cauldron of irrational thing. That this is, I tend to focus on the UFO, phenomenon, and
Yeah.
how that is still ongoing and persisting, and that it is a cult like belief that is growing, and they're always disclosing things and preparing for it and stuff. But the transhumanist and control grid, uh, um, 15-minute city, thing that is literally happening in different places. In Mexico, there's biometric entry and exit points and stuff in different cities.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think it's really happening in Canada yet, but certainly during COVID, you saw camps of people being isolated and all their rights stripped away, and it's just like that suddenly happens as well. And yeah, you see people's reaction. Um, a lot of people feel helpless. A lot of people are so stressed about the fact that they feel helpless that they just start taking. I think it gets converted into resentment of those who are resisting it because in some sense they are, it's like just give them what they want and they'll leave us alone. Like it's this kind of that
Yep.
level of submissiveness where it's like it's actually I'm mad at you because if you would just go along with it, they wouldn't punish me and everyone else anymore. Like it's that level. Like
Sure.
the news explicitly, repeatedly hammered that point across that the unvaccinated are the ones creating the problem, and everything will go back to normal if we just reach this quota or whatever. And like that is the level of psychological warfare, and it
Yeah.
doesn't need to be that emergency. That
They're like, shut up. They're going to hear us. Right? You can picture like some kids huddling in the corner, hiding,
right.
and playing hide and seek, and someone's coming around looking for them, and you're the one talking. They want you to shut up because you're going to give away their position. They just
Uh-huh.
want to be left alone. And that's where that compassion and the nuance comes into, because also, of course, they just want to be left alone. Like all of a sudden their world's flipped upside down and uh, they're given all these crazy directives and nothing makes sense. And they're like, just shut up and do what they're telling them. We don't know what's going on. They're scared. They're genuinely scared. And
Mhm.
so you can have compassion for someone who's genuinely scared. It's harder to have compassion for someone who's calling you for you to like not be allowed to the emergency room and you should just die, or being sent to a camp, or, buy Wheezy or whatever kind of nonsense.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's harder to have compassion for people who are actively malicious about you making a different choice. But for the general population, they were just scared and they just wanted to get along with their lives and they didn't know what was going on. And so, and of course, who gets projected by the algorithm? It's the blue-haired Karen screaming, or the, you know what I mean? Like it's your
Yeah, or
day-to-day
the
life
the
that wasn't the same as experience as your online life.
yeah. I think that is one of the reasons why there's in times like this where there's not, I mean, as messed up and chaotic as things are, there is not a singular dominant emergency narrative crisis happening right now. We have the luxury of stopping and thinking again for a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, this is where thought experiments and novels like Project Nimrod and I know I try to do it in my Substack um, whenever I feel like I have an angle to approach it from. I like to try to get people to deal with it because you're voluntarily stepping into an uncomfortable world and an uncomfortable position and asking like what would I really do in this situation if things became that bad again or worse.
Yeah.
And so I want to wish you luck with the book, and
Thank you.
looking forward to, I mean, who knows how long a sequel will take, but if you're planning a series,
Yeah.
it's always exciting to.
I'm
Um,
trying very hard to have this next book done within a year. So,
that must mean you have some pretty good plotting. You're pretty good at planning this whole thing out because a year is a good timeline. And
it's going to be tough.
yeah, well, I'm glad you came on and explained it to me, and we got to have the discussion. We're gonna wrap it up, and I'll say,
Sure.
uh, tell us the, um, I mean, it's on Amazon, right? Is it on
Yeah,
a
I
bunch of
can
other
share
stores
the
too, or is it exclusive to there for now, or what?
well, I published it myself in the sense that I also purchased ISBN numbers. So I am my own publisher. Amazon isn't my publisher.
Right,
As of right now, it's the only place it's available. I do plan on building a website and then also um, trying to get my Subtle Cane publishing up and running and being able to do some things like that. But the book was ready. The best way to get it out there was to start it for sale on Amazon. So
for
I
sure,
can
yeah.
I can share that link. There's a Kindle version, and then there's also the paperback. Uh, I didn't restrict the Kindle version, so if you don't have a Kindle, um, there is EPUB. You can download it as an EPUB, and so I wanted people with whatever e-reader to be able to utilize that. And I can't go without saying that I would not have been able to get the paperback properly formatted and done the way I did without the help of Miriam Eklund. And she formatted that for me, and then Froda Klevstool formatted the EPUB for me. And so I have to give them a huge shout out and a thank you because they got me over the finish line. And you yourself, Terry, helped advise me, answer questions um, that helped me figure out what the process was because it is quite the process to self
Yeah,
publish. So
yeah, once it's finished, I think you know, it's not as scary. You can see that it's just manageable steps, but, yeah, I remember the initial process of trying to at first, the first couple of books I did, I hired a self-publishing company, which is they do a lot of the back end stuff for you. Um,
yeah,
and so it was still self-published, I still own the rights to it, but I didn't have to set up the accounts and make all the
uh,
decisions at every turn, but that costs so much money. And it at some point it's like, okay, I think I can handle this myself. And so I've been doing it the way that you did it, myself more recently, and it's intimidating, but it's very nice. I think it's wonderful that we currently have a system like this where an author can self-publish. You still own the rights. You could put it on Barnes and Noble. You could put it at other places yet. You can make another edition if you wanted to. You could like having not having to give away your rights. I've watched plenty of videos and people giving advice who had experience in traditional publishing, and they are almost all agreed now that that is a worse system than self-publishing with even though like theoretically your distribution is so much bigger and you would whatever the royalties are better um
significantly.
yeah like it's night and day like it if somebody wants to support you and your work, and this has been the case with me, and they buy one of my books, like it makes an actual difference in my bank account. I don't need to
Yeah,
sell like 25,000 copies of a book in order for it to profit me something.
yeah,
Um, if I sell 400 copies of a book, it's very nice for me.
yeah,
And so like people are willing to pay, but in a way, I don't know, at least for me, it's uh it's easier to support somebody who's self-publishing because I know the money's going into their pocket. They're the one that did all the work,
yeah,
and so I hope that people who are interested in Project Nimrod will uh, I find that people tend to like the physical copies more. Maybe that's just my genre, and people, it could be completely different. But I find that people enjoy owning a copy and knowing that they'll just have it in their house. Nobody can take it away from them, and even if it somehow like disappeared, that they still have access to it. And
yeah.
they so yeah, I'm rooting for you, And
Thank you.
I hope that I actually hope that you get enough success that you can inspire more people to do it, because I would like there to be a kind of a chain reaction of people who have I've tried telling I'm not going to name their names, but I've tried telling a bunch of people that I talk to that, you know, they should also publish stuff because they have so much insight and things they should say, essays they could write, essays they've basically already written. They just never put it into book format.
Yeah.
And there's people who could do like novels, and um, there's like this fear of, and it's a time commitment. There's a lot of commitments to it,
It's a lot of
but
time consuming.
but I feel like it's worth it, and I
Yeah.
try to promote and help people who are going down that path. So
Well, I
I
appreciate you having me on and, talking through all the topics that we did, and I always appreciate your insight and your ability to articulate, um, what you're thinking in a very nuanced way that I think expands upon simple points and turns them into a real discussion, and I always appreciate that about you, Terry.
Thanks. Yeah, awesome. Well, uh, I I I I hope you post some. Like, I hope to see some, updates, landmarks, celebrations if there's it starts with the smallest. I remember selling I published a hardcover version that I didn't think was gonna sell at all because it was more expensive, and it ended up being the best selling of the versions, and, um, I suspected I really believed that my first books, if I could sell 30 copies, I was actually like, I was ready to celebrate. I'm like, this would be 30 real people out there in the world actually own and are reading the thing that
Yeah,
I published. And then when it went beyond that, I'm still stunned. I still get people buying them, and I don't do any marketing. Like, I mean, obviously I mention them in discussions and on my Substack and stuff, but like I've never done proper marketing. And so who knows how these, you know,
well,
word
I
of
would
mouth.
en yeah, I would encourage people to buy your books. I would encourage people, and I would say if you want to, if you're someone who's watching this, listening to this, you're likely someone who has a mind toward trying to fend off or at least mitigate the damage that the system is doing. And one of the things you can do is support people like Terry and myself when we put ourselves, our heart and souls into these endeavors to try and um, bring people up, not tear people down or make people feel hopeless, but to build people up and to give them hope, and then to also, you know that you're supporting someone that really is on your side, that really does believe that you have value. And like I always said at the end of my podcast episodes, you're valued, you're loved, and you are worthy.
With that said, I think what I found helpful, and maybe it'd be the case for you as well, is to give people an email address or a contact point if they buy your book. One of the great things about having a real independent, amateur author putting themselves out there um, is that they're accessible. And if somebody reads Project Nimrod and they have questions or feedback, or they want to thank you or whatever, do you have an email that you prefer people to reach out to you at?
Yeah, it is subtlecane at protonmail.com. And I'll share the link to the book. I'll share the link to my Substack, and then I'll also share my email with you kind of in a nice little format. Terry, if you can put those in the show notes, that would be much appreciated.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks, Aaron. We'll end it there, but hang around for a bit and we'll talk for a little bit longer.
All right, appreciate you.